The train crawled through the mist like an old, tired beast. Its iron lungs hissed and wheezed, dragging the worn-out carriages across a landscape scarred by war. Corporal Daniel Mercer sat by the window, staring blankly at the ghostly trees passing by. His reflection stared back, a man older than his 26 years, eyes sunken, jaw clenched, uniform too big after months of hunger. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels felt almost soothing, like a heartbeat trying to remind him he was still alive. Outside, the world was gray. Fields once golden with wheat were now dark with craters and the bones of machines. Villages lay in ruins, roofs torn, chimneys broken, streets empty. He couldn't help but wonder, was his town still standing? Was there still a home to return to, or only ashes? Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. It showed a smiling woman with light hair tied in a scarf, holding a small boy. Anna and Peter. His heart tightened painfully. He hadn't seen them for 3 years. The war had taken so much: friends, sleep, faith. But this picture had survived every shell and storm. He had kept it in his breast pocket through every battle, close to his heart like a talisman. The train whistle screamed as it neared his stop. Daniel's hand trembled slightly as he gathered his bag, a small canvas sack with everything he owned. Around him, other soldiers sat silently, eyes hollow, faces turned toward the fog. No one spoke. No one needed to. Each man carried his own ghosts. As the train slowed, Daniel saw the station sign emerge from the mist, Greystone. His hometown. He stood up, heart pounding. I'm home, he thought. But deep inside, something whispered, home may not be the same anymore. The train came to a slow, shuddering stop. Steam hissed from beneath the wheels, curling around Daniel's boots like fog from another world. The door creaked open, and a blast of cold air struck his face, sharp, clean, almost unfamiliar after years of mud and gunpowder. He stepped down onto the platform, his boots echoing against the wooden boards. For a moment, he just stood there, listening. Silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of absence. Greystone Station used to be alive, filled with laughter, chatter, the smell of bread from the nearby bakery. Now, only a few broken benches remained. The clock above the platform was frozen at 4:17, its glass cracked, as if time itself had stopped the day the first bombs fell. Daniel adjusted the strap of his bag and looked around. There was no one to greet him. No officials, no families waving banners or crying with joy. Just a thin old man sweeping the floor with slow, heavy strokes. The man's eyes lifted, dull but curious. You one of the boys from the front? He asked in a low rasp. Daniel nodded. Yes, the war's over. The man gave a dry chuckle. Over, they say. For them, maybe. For us, it just changed shape. He turned back to his broom, muttering something Daniel couldn't catch. Daniel left the platform and walked through the gates, his boots crunching against gravel. The streets beyond were eerily familiar. The same cobblestones, the same crooked lampposts, but everything looked smaller, quieter, drained of color. Windows were boarded up, doors hung open. A sign outside the post office swung lazily in the wind, squeaking like an old hinge. He turned a corner and stopped. There, across the square, was the bakery where Anna used to work. The building still stood, though one wall was blackened by smoke. The windows were dark, the door chained shut. A hollow ache settled in his chest. He whispered her name, Anna, but the sound was lost to the empty air. Then, somewhere far down the street, he heard it, the faint cry of a child. Daniel froze. The sound came again, faint but clear, a child's cry echoing between the stone walls of Greystone's deserted streets. It was a fragile sound, like a ghost from his photograph come alive. His heart jolted. Could it be Peter? He knew it was impossible, yet the hope rose inside him like a spark in the dark. He started walking, then running, his boots striking against the cobblestones. The sound led him toward the church square. Once, it had been the heart of the town, flower stalls, the scent of coffee drifting from the cafe on the corner. Now the fountain in the center was dry and cracked, pigeons perched on the statue of an angel missing one wing. The cry came again, this time closer, from behind a toppled wagon near the steps of the church. Daniel crouched low and peered behind it. A small boy, perhaps 6 years old, sat curled up beneath a torn blanket, clutching a wooden toy soldier. His cheeks were smudged with dirt, his eyes too large for his thin face. When he saw Daniel, he flinched, ready to run. "Hey," Daniel said softly, kneeling so they were at the same height. "It's all right. I'm not going to hurt you." The boy stared for a moment, breathing fast. "You're a soldier," he whispered. "Not anymore," Daniel replied. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated. "Thomas." "Where are your parents, Thomas?" The child's lip trembled. "Gone. Mama got sick. Papa went to fight. He didn't come back." Daniel's throat tightened. The words felt like an echo of his own life. He reached into his coat pocket and took out a small piece of chocolate, one of the last he'd kept from a supply drop months ago. He handed it to the boy. "Here, take it." Thomas looked at it as if it were treasure. "Are you from here?" he asked through a mouthful. Daniel nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the burned rooftops. "I was. Long time ago." The church bells above were cracked and rusted. But when the wind blew, they made a soft, haunting sound, like the memory of prayer. For the first time since he'd stepped off the train, Daniel didn't feel completely alone. The next morning came quietly, painted in pale gray light. Daniel woke on the steps of the church, the boy asleep beside him, wrapped in his coat. The war had taught him to wake at the slightest sound, but here, in this silent town, even the wind seemed cautious. He rose slowly, his body stiff from the cold stone, and looked around. Greystone looked like it had been frozen mid-breath. Houses leaning tiredly against one another, windows blank, gardens overrun with weeds. A few birds hopped through the square, pecking at nothing. Somewhere far away, a dog barked once and fell silent. He turned back to Thomas, who stirred and blinked sleepily. "You hungry?" Daniel asked. The boy nodded. Together they searched through what was left of the bakery. Inside, the shelves were covered in dust, the counters cracked. But behind the counter, Daniel found a tin box sealed tight. Inside were a few stale biscuits, still good enough to eat. Thomas devoured them, smiling faintly. As Daniel watched him, something stirred in his chest, not quite hope, but the ghost of it. This boy was alive, surviving. Maybe others were too. He decided to walk to his old house. It wasn't far, just down Elm Street, past the town hall. Every step he took felt heavier, like the air itself was full of memories. There was the alley where he and Anna had danced in the rain. The iron gate where she'd waved goodbye the day he left for the front. When he reached his house, he stopped. The front gate hung open, swinging slightly. The garden was wild, overgrown with weeds and dead flowers. The windows were broken. A shutter banged against the wall with every gust of wind. He pushed the door open. Inside, it smelled of dust and damp wood. The furniture was still there, overturned, broken, burned. His breath caught when he saw the small rocking horse in the corner. Peter's toy. Its paint was chipped, one wheel missing. Thomas stayed in the doorway, quiet, watching. Daniel knelt beside the horse, running a trembling hand across its worn surface. "They were here," he whispered. "They were real." On the wall, half burned and blackened, a piece of paper was nailed, a notice with names. Missing persons. His eyes scanned the list until he found two names that made his knees buckle. Anna Mercer, Peter Mercer. Daniel stared at the paper as if it were a bullet wound. The names blurred before his eyes, the ink bleeding into the charred wall. Anna Mercer, Peter Mercer, both listed under the same column, missing since winter of '44. His fingers brushed over the rough surface, tracing the letters as though touch alone could bring them back. Missing, not dead. That word flickered like a faint light inside him, weak but alive. He turned toward Thomas, who stood silently in the doorway, his small face pale in the dim light. "Do you know where the townspeople went?" Daniel asked, his voice hoarse. The boy shook his head. Some left when the soldiers came. Some didn't come back after the big fire. Others just disappeared. Daniel swallowed hard. Disappeared? Thomas nodded slowly. Mama said people were taken at night. Trucks came with no lights. If they called your name, you had to go. A chill crept down Daniel's spine. He looked around the room again. The overturned chair, the cracked picture frame on the floor, the shattered mirror. It was as if time had been ripped open and left to rot. He picked up the frame. The glass was broken, but the photo inside was still visible. Anna smiling, Peter on her lap, sunlight spilling through the kitchen window. The same photo he carried in his pocket, but here, it felt like a ghostly echo. "I have to find them," Daniel whispered. Thomas tilted his head. "You think they're still alive?" Daniel's jaw tightened. If there's even a chance, I'll find them. The boy looked at him for a long moment before nodding. Then I'll help you. Daniel almost smiled. You're brave, Thomas. I've been alone too long, the boy said simply. Outside, the clouds gathered low and heavy, the first drops of rain starting to fall. The town seemed to sigh with the sound, quiet, broken, grieving. Daniel stepped to the doorway, watching the street glisten under the gray sky. He didn't know where to start, but he knew he couldn't stop. From the church tower, a bell rang once, hollow, distant, as if the town itself had just awakened. Rain fell steadily as Daniel and Thomas left the ruined town behind. The narrow road wound through fields that had once been alive with wheat and laughter, now nothing but mud and memories. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and distant smoke, the familiar perfume of war's aftermath. Daniel carried his bag over one shoulder, the boy trailing close behind. We'll head east, he said, mostly to himself. If they were taken, maybe to the camps near Hereford. It's 20 miles, maybe more. Thomas kicked a stone along the path. What if we find soldiers there? Daniel's hand instinctively went to where his rifle used to hang. He'd left it behind, a deliberate choice, one he wasn't sure was wise anymore. Then we'll keep to the woods, he said quietly. Not all uniforms mean safety. The landscape shifted as they walked. Forests of thin birch trees, fields where the earth was still torn open by shells. Once, they passed a rusted tank half swallowed by mud. A crow perched on its barrel. Thomas stared at it wide-eyed. Did you fight in one of those? No, Daniel replied. I fought beside them. The noise could shake the sky. They reached a stream at dusk and stopped to rest. Daniel cupped his hands in the cold water, drinking deeply. Thomas watched him, then pointed at the horizon. There's light. Over there. Daniel looked, a faint orange flicker in the distance. Maybe a fire, maybe a home. He hesitated, torn between caution and hope. Finally, he said, let's go. The closer they got, the clearer it became. A farmhouse, still standing, smoke rising from the chimney. Daniel's heart began to race. He hadn't seen a real light in a window since returning. When they reached the gate, he called out softly, hello? Anyone here? For a long moment, nothing. Then the door opened, and a woman stepped out, holding a lantern. Her face was sharp and thin, her eyes wary but kind. You shouldn't be walking out here, she said. Not at night. Wolves and worse. We're looking for someone, Daniel replied. My wife and son. They might have passed this way. The woman's eyes softened slightly. Come in. You look half-starved. As they stepped inside, warmth hit them. Firelight, the smell of soup. For the first time in years, Daniel felt almost human again. But in the shadows of the farmhouse, something stirred. Someone was watching them. The warmth of the farmhouse felt almost unreal. After days of gray rain and cold stone, the flicker of firelight painted the walls gold. Daniel and Thomas sat close to the hearth, their damp clothes steaming in the heat. The woman moved quietly, almost ghost-like, ladling soup into 2 chipped bowls. My name's Clara, she said finally, setting the food down. You came from Greystone? Daniel nodded. Or what's left of it? Her eyes darkened. I heard it was bombed. Few made it out. He stirred his soup absently. I found my home, burned. My wife and son, they're listed as missing. Clara's hand paused on the edge of the table. Missing, she echoed softly. That word still haunts this valley. So many gone. The army took some for reconstruction work, but no one ever saw them again. Thomas looked up. Why would they take people if the war was over? Clara sighed, glancing toward the window where the wind pressed against the shutters. Wars don't end just because the shooting stops, child. There are always people who want to erase what reminds them of it. The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. For a moment, Daniel thought he saw a figure reflected in the glass. A tall man standing outside, motionless. He blinked, and it was gone. Do you live here alone? He asked. Clara hesitated. Not always. My brother stayed with me, until last winter. He disappeared too. Daniel leaned back, exhaustion creeping in. The warmth, the crackle of fire, and the smell of bread almost lulled him into peace. But something about the house felt off, too quiet, too watchful. Clara stood and gathered the empty bowls. There's a room upstairs. You can sleep there tonight. In the morning, I'll show you the old road east, toward Hereford. Maybe someone there remembers your family. Thank you, Daniel said, meaning it. As he climbed the stairs with Thomas, the floorboards creaked beneath their boots. The small room had 2 narrow beds and a window overlooking the fields. Daniel looked out into the night, and this time, he was certain. A shadow moved among the trees. Someone was out there, watching. Daniel woke to a sound, soft, deliberate, out of place. The kind of sound a soldier never forgets. His eyes snapped open, the faint moonlight spilling through the window, painting silver lines across the wooden floor. For a moment, everything was still. Then it came again, a slow creak on the stair, 1 step at a time. He rose quietly, motioning for Thomas to stay silent. The boy's wide eyes gleamed in the dark. Daniel moved to the door, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. He gripped a broken chair leg instead, rough, splintered, heavy enough. Another step, then another. Daniel waited until the shadow reached the landing, the dim light revealing the outline of a man, tall, wrapped in a tattered coat, face hidden beneath a hood. "Who's there?" Daniel demanded. The figure froze, then raised a trembling hand. Don't shout." The voice was low, ragged, but familiar in a way that made Daniel's stomach twist. "Step into the light," he said. The man did. His face was thin, unshaven, eyes wild from exhaustion. A scar cut through his eyebrow. He looked like a ghost pulled from the trenches. "Name's Elias," he whispered. "Clara's brother. Or what's left of him." Daniel blinked. "She said you disappeared." Elias gave a bitter smile. "Disappeared, that's one way to put it. I escaped." He glanced over his shoulder, fear flickering in his eyes. "They're still out there, men in gray trucks. They come at night, rounding up survivors. Not for rebuilding, for silence." Daniel's blood went cold. "Why? The war's over." Elias shook his head. "Not for them. They're cleaning up the past. Anyone who saw too much, anyone who remembers what happened in the camps." A floorboard groaned below. Clara's voice called softly from downstairs. "Elias? You shouldn't be here." Her tone wasn't relief. It was warning. Daniel turned toward the window just as headlights cut through the trees outside. Engines. Multiple. They had found them. Engines growled outside, deep and menacing, breaking the fragile silence of the night. Daniel rushed to the window. 3 trucks had stopped just beyond the fence, their lights slicing through the mist. Men climbed down, their boots heavy against the wet ground. They wore gray coats without insignia, moving with a purpose Daniel recognized too well, soldiers or something worse. Elias backed away from the window. "They followed me," he whispered. "I tried to lose them, but they track everything now. Every whisper, every face that doesn't fit their new order." "Get the boy," Daniel ordered. "We're leaving." Thomas was already awake, clutching his toy soldier tight. Clara appeared in the doorway, pale but calm. "You can't go out there," she said. "They'll shoot on sight." Daniel's jaw tightened. "If we stay, they'll take us." Elias grabbed his arm. "There's a way out. The cellar leads to an old root tunnel. It runs under the orchard, comes out by the stream. We used it when raids began." The men outside shouted, short, clipped orders. A door slammed. Footsteps crunched closer. "Go," Clara hissed, pushing Daniel toward the stairs. "Elias knows the way. I'll stall them." "Clara, no. Just go." They slipped down the narrow cellar steps as the front door burst open. Light flooded the room above. Daniel could hear voices, harsh, commanding, foreign. One of them barked, "Search every room." In the darkness below, Elias found the wooden hatch and pried it open. Cold air rushed in, smelling of damp soil. "Hurry!" Daniel climbed through first, pulling Thomas after him. The tunnel was narrow, lined with roots and dripping earth. They crawled through the dark as muffled shouts echoed above. Then, gunfire. Thomas gasped, but Daniel pressed a hand over his mouth. "Quiet," he whispered. They reached the end of the tunnel, pushing through a screen of weeds into the night. The truck's lights glowed faintly behind them. Smoke drifted from the farmhouse roof. Clara's sacrifice burned in Daniel's mind, and so did her last look. She knew this would happen. The night swallowed them whole as they ran. Branches whipped Daniel's face, roots clawed at his boots, and still he didn't stop. The woods were dense and slick with rain, the ground soft from weeks of storms. Behind them, voices shouted, sharp, commanding, followed by the crack of gunfire. "Keep low," Daniel hissed, pushing Thomas ahead of him. The boy's breath came in short, frightened bursts, but he didn't cry. Elias stumbled beside them, limping badly, one hand pressed to his ribs. "They won't stop," Elias gasped. "They never do." "Then we make them lose us," Daniel said. He veered off the trail, heading toward the sound of running water. The stream wasn't far. He could smell it before he saw it. They crashed through the brush and into the icy shallows, wading fast downstream to mask their tracks. For minutes, maybe hours, they followed the twisting waterway until the shouts faded behind them. Finally, Daniel motioned to stop beneath a fallen tree. They crouched in the shadows, dripping, shaking. Thomas clung to Daniel's sleeve. "Are they gone?" "Not yet," Daniel whispered. "But they will be." Elias leaned against the trunk, breathing hard. Blood seeped through his shirt. "They shot Clara," he said quietly, voice breaking. "She tried to talk to them. They didn't even listen." Daniel closed his eyes. "She saved us." A faint glow appeared through the trees, dawn breaking, pale and cold. Birds began to stir, their cries cutting through the mist. The world felt deceptively peaceful again. "We can't stay here," Daniel said. "At sunrise, they'll search the valley. We move east, Herefield's still a day away." Elias nodded weakly. "There's a resistance cell near the old rail line. If they're still alive, they might help." Thomas looked up at Daniel. "Will we find your family there?" Daniel met his gaze. If they're anywhere left in this world, yes. But deep down, he wasn't sure if he believed his own words anymore. The sun rose pale and distant, a weak coin behind a veil of fog. Daniel, Thomas, and Elias trudged through the drenched countryside, the muddy path stretching ahead like a scar through the land. Every sound felt louder in the stillness. The caw of distant crows, the slosh of boots, the faint hum of the wind in shattered trees. Elias moved slower with every step, his wound darkening his coat. Daniel wanted to stop, but time wasn't their ally. "Just a bit farther," he urged. "Once we reach Hereford, we'll find shelter." Elias gave a faint smile. "You talk like a man who still believes in safe places." Thomas walked between them, silent, clutching his wooden soldier. The boy's eyes had changed. The innocence that once shimmered there was dimming, replaced by something older. Something war leaves behind in everyone who survives it. By midday, they reached the ridge overlooking Hereford. Daniel froze. What had once been a bustling mining town now lay in ruins. Buildings blackened, roofs caved in, chimneys standing like gravestones. Columns of smoke still drifted lazily upward. "They got here too," Elias murmured. No one left. But Daniel's eyes caught movement, a faint flicker of light near the old rail yard. Maybe not everyone. They made their way down cautiously, keeping to the alleys. The smell of ash and oil hung thick in the air. When they reached the rail yard, Daniel saw what the light had come from, a lantern hanging beside a trapdoor beneath one of the storage sheds. Elias knelt, knocking 3 times in a strange rhythm. For a moment, nothing. Then, from below, came a muffled reply, the same pattern, repeated. The trapdoor opened, revealing a narrow face lit by the lantern's glow. "Elias," the man whispered, eyes widening. "You made it." Elias smiled faintly. "Barely. Who are they?" the man asked, nodding toward Daniel and Thomas. "Friends," Elias said, "and maybe our last chance." The man gestured them inside. "Then come quickly. If the patrols return, none of us will see another sunrise." The trapdoor shut above them, sealing out the daylight. A lantern flickered weakly in the underground passage, throwing trembling shadows across the earthen walls. The air was cool and smelled of damp rock and coal dust, a relic of the old mines that ran beneath Hereford. "This way," the man said, moving ahead with practiced ease. "Stay quiet." Daniel followed with Thomas close behind, one hand resting on the boy's shoulder. Elias limped last, his breath uneven. The tunnel twisted deeper until it opened into a larger chamber lined with crates, blankets, and makeshift bunks. There were maybe 15 people, men, women, even 2 children, all dressed in worn, mismatched clothes. Their eyes lifted as the newcomers entered, wary at first, then softening when they saw Elias. "Elias," said a tall woman with a rifle slung across her back. "We thought you were dead." "Not yet," he answered with a faint grin, though it wasn't for lack of trying. She crossed the room and pulled him into a brief, fierce hug before looking at Daniel. "Name's Ruth. I lead what's left of us. You're not one of ours." "No," Daniel said. "I'm looking for my family." The last record I found said they were taken east, maybe near here. Ruth's expression darkened. If they were taken east, there's a chance they were sent to Site 12. Site 12? Daniel asked. Elias looked away. It's not a camp, he said quietly. It's a pit. They called it a relocation center, but it's where they burned the archives and the people who knew too much. Thomas pressed closer to Daniel, his small hand gripping tightly. Ruth crouched beside a map spread across a wooden crate. Site 12 is 3 miles from here, through the marshlands. It's heavily guarded, but if your family's name was on the list, she hesitated. There might still be records. Daniel stared at the map, jaw clenched. Then I'm going there. Ruth met his eyes, steady, resolute. Then we're going with you. Above them, a faint rumble echoed through the tunnels, trucks moving through Herefield's ruins. The hunt wasn't over. They moved out before dawn, slipping from the ruins of Herefield into the wet gray world beyond. The air was sharp with mist and the smell of rust. Daniel led the group, Ruth close behind, her rifle slung across her shoulder. Elias limped along with Thomas, who carried the small wooden soldier in his pocket like a charm. None of them spoke. The sound of boots squelching in the marshes was the only proof they were still alive. The land stretched endlessly, pools of stagnant water, reeds whispering in the wind, and the faint glow of a dying sunrise. Every few minutes, Ruth raised her hand, and everyone froze. Convoys passed in the distance, trucks painted gray, moving in formation like insects. Their engines growled through the fog before fading again. They're heading east, Elias murmured. Toward the site. Daniel nodded. Then we're close. By noon, they reached the ridge overlooking it. The ground dipped into a basin surrounded by wire and concrete. Site 12 lay below, long barracks, blackened chimneys, and tall lights humming even in daylight. The smell hit first. Ash, fuel, something burned long ago but never gone. Thomas stared wide-eyed. Is this where they took your family? Daniel's voice was tight. Maybe. Or where they ended. Ruth scanned through her binoculars. 2 guards at the front gate. Patrols every 20 minutes. The west side has a drainage channel. Old, narrow, half-collapsed, but it's our best chance. We wait for dark, Daniel said. They crouched in the reeds, watching the gray sky sink into dusk. The air grew colder, and the lights of Site 12 flickered to life one by one, humming like distant thunder. Daniel thought of Anna's smile, Peter's small hand, the life that had vanished into this place. His heart hardened. Tonight, they would stop being ghosts. Tonight, they would enter hell to bring the truth back with them. Night fell like a curtain of ink, heavy and absolute. The wind had died, and every sound carried far. Daniel crouched by the edge of the marsh, heart pounding in rhythm with the faint thrum of the searchlights sweeping across the camp. Ruth knelt beside him, checking her watch. Elias lay on his stomach, face pale, hands trembling slightly as he loaded a revolver that had seen better days. Thomas sat between them, eyes wide but silent. The boy had learned the art of fear. 15 minutes until the next patrol, Ruth whispered. Once they passed the west gate, we move. The group slipped into the tall grass, each step slow and deliberate. Daniel's boots sank in the mud, the cold water soaking through his socks, but he didn't care. Ahead, half hidden beneath a mound of earth, was the drainage tunnel Ruth had mentioned, a narrow iron grate partly buried in weeds. Elias pried it open with a rusted crowbar. The hinges screamed softly before giving way. A stale gust of air poured out, thick with mildew and something else, the smell of death long forgotten. Thomas hesitated at the entrance. Daniel crouched beside him. Stay close to me, he whispered. Whatever happens, don't make a sound. They crawled into the darkness. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough to move through, the walls slick with moss and cold water dripping from the ceiling. Their breaths echoed, mingling with the distant mechanical hum of the camp above. Halfway through, Daniel heard voices, muffled, close. Guards talking above them, boots clanging on the metal grate. He froze, heart hammering. A drop of water hit his cheek. The voices faded. When they finally reached the end, Ruth pushed the hatch open a fraction. Through the narrow slit, Daniel saw the heart of Site 12, barracks, searchlights, and a tall watchtower looming against the stars. They were inside. The hatch opened silently, revealing the dark underbelly of Site 12. The air that rushed in was warm and foul, thick with smoke and oil. Daniel climbed out first, crouching low between stacks of rusted barrels. The others followed, shadows within shadows. Beyond them stretched rows of barracks, long, blackened buildings fenced by barbed wire and lit by harsh floodlights that hummed like insects. Ruth gestured sharply, pointing toward a low structure near the center. "That's the records building," she whispered. "If your family was processed here, their names will be inside." Elias's hand gripped her arm. "There's movement," he hissed. Two guards paced near the entrance, rifles slung casually over their shoulders. A truck idled nearby, its engine rumbling softly. Daniel studied the rhythm of the guards' patrol. 10 steps forward, pause, turn, 10 back. Years of battlefield instinct stirred inside him. "When they cross," he said, "we move fast and low." The moment came. One by one, they darted across the open ground, boots whispering against the gravel. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. They reached the side of the building unseen, pressing against the cold concrete wall. Ruth pulled a small blade from her boot and wedged it between the door's hinges. It gave with a quiet snap. Inside, the smell of paper and mold hit them. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with files, ledgers, and yellow documents marked confidential. Daniel's hands shook as he flipped through folders, names, photos, numbers. Rows upon rows of lives reduced to ink. Then he froze. Mercer, Anna, transfer east, March 1944. His breath caught. Beneath her name, Mercer, Peter, same transport. They were here, he whispered. They were alive. Ruth looked at him, grim. Then maybe they're still somewhere beyond this place. Outside, a siren wailed suddenly, slicing through the night. They had been discovered. The siren tore through the air, shrill and merciless. Red lights flashed across the compound, throwing the world into chaos. Daniel's instincts kicked in before thought. "Move," he shouted, grabbing Thomas's arm and pulling him toward the door. Ruth was already at the threshold, scanning the yard. Shadows darted between barracks as guards shouted orders, their boots hammering the ground. Elias staggered after them, clutching his side. "This way, the fuel depot," he gasped. "There's a service gate beyond it." They ran, keeping low as bullets cracked through the night. Sparks danced off metal as a searchlight swept over them, blinding white. Daniel threw himself over Thomas, rolling behind a truck. The stench of gasoline filled his nose. Ruth fired twice, sharp, efficient shots. One guard fell. The other ducked for cover. "We won't make the gate," she yelled. Daniel's mind raced. The truck beside them, full tank, engine still idling. "Then we'll make our own way out." He climbed into the cab, slamming the door. "Elias, get in." Elias barely managed to pull himself up. Ruth and Thomas clambered into the back as Daniel jammed the clutch and floored the accelerator. The truck roared forward, smashing through a stack of crates. Bullets shattered the windshield, glass sprayed across his face. He didn't slow. "Hold on," he shouted. The truck hit the main fence with a crash like thunder. Metal screamed, sparks exploded, and the whole structure tore open. The vehicle burst through, tires skidding on mud as they broke into the open marshlands. Behind them, flames rose. The depot ignited, fire spreading fast. The sky burned red against the black horizon. Elias coughed, blood on his lips. "You did it," he rasped. Daniel's grip tightened on the wheel. "No," he said quietly, staring into the dark road ahead. "We just started something we can't stop." The night behind them burned like a second sunrise. The truck barreled down the muddy road, its engine screaming in protest. Daniel's hands gripped the wheel until his knuckles whitened, the shattered windshield letting in a roar of wind and smoke. Every bump jarred his bones, but he didn't dare slow down. Behind them, Site 12 was a column of fire, lighting the marsh in pulses of red and orange. Ruth crouched in the truck bed, reloading her rifle with shaking hands. Thomas sat beside her, clutching the side rail, his face pale and blank. Elias leaned against the passenger door, blood darkening his coat. His breathing had grown ragged, every inhale sharp, wet. "They'll send patrols," Ruth shouted over the engine. "We can't stay on the road." Daniel nodded. "We'll turn north, toward the ridge." He jerked the wheel, veering onto a narrow trail lined with birch trees. Branches scraped the sides of the truck, sparks flying from twisted metal. The engine sputtered, coughing black smoke. "Come on," he muttered, urging it forward. Finally, the truck gave out on a hill overlooking the burning site. It shuddered once, then died. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of distant flames. Daniel climbed out, breathing hard. "Everyone all right?" Thomas nodded mutely. Ruth jumped down, scanning the horizon. "We bought ourselves a few hours at best. When the flames die, they'll come looking." Daniel turned toward Elias. The older man's eyes were half closed, sweat gleaming on his forehead. Daniel pressed a hand to his shoulder. "Stay with me." Elias gave a faint smile. "You found their names," he whispered. "That's more than most ever did." Then his body went still, his hands slipping from Daniel's grasp. For a moment, the world stopped. Ruth lowered her head. Thomas began to cry quietly. Daniel looked toward the horizon, where the stars had vanished behind a veil of smoke. He whispered, "We finished this for him." By dawn, the fire at Site 12 had dimmed to a dull, smoking scar on the horizon. Daniel stood at the edge of the ridge, watching it fade beneath the morning fog. The smell of burning still clung to the air, a mixture of victory and guilt. Behind him, Ruth was wrapping Elias's body in an old tarp, her movements slow, deliberate, almost reverent. Thomas sat nearby, staring blankly at the ground, fingers tracing circles in the dirt. Daniel approached. "We'll bury him here," he said softly. "He deserves more than to be left in the open." Ruth nodded, eyes red but dry. Together, they dug into the frozen earth with bayonets and shovels scavenged from the truck. When the grave was ready, Daniel laid Elias down gently. The man's face looked strangely peaceful, as if he'd already seen beyond the pain. Ruth murmured something under her breath. Not a prayer, just a promise. Daniel didn't speak. He pressed Elias's dog tags into the soil and covered them with earth. When it was done, they stood in silence, the wind whistling through the trees. Finally, Ruth said, "We can't stay here. They'll search the whole sector once they realize we escaped." Daniel nodded, staring north. "We head to the hills. There's an old rail line that leads toward the eastern camps. If Anna and Peter were moved, it'll take us closer." Thomas's voice broke the quiet. "Do you think they're still alive?" Daniel hesitated. "If I stop believing they are," he said slowly, "then I might as well have stayed in that camp myself." They gathered their few supplies, a rifle, a map, a canteen half full of water, and began their climb through the charred woods. Each step carried the weight of everything lost and everything still worth saving. As they moved, Ruth looked back one last time. Smoke rose behind them like ghosts refusing to rest. By noon, the fog had lifted, revealing a landscape of gray hills and blackened trees. The trio moved in silence, exhaustion settling deep into their bones. The air tasted of ash and iron, every breath scraping like gravel. Thomas stumbled often, but he never complained. Daniel kept him close, one steady hand always guiding the boy forward. When they reached the crest of the next hill, Ruth froze. "There," she whispered, pointing. Below them, a railway line cut through the valley, a lonely scar of steel glinting in the pale light. But what caught Daniel's eye wasn't the tracks, it was the train. Half hidden in the distance, a convoy sat abandoned on the rails. Its black cars stretched into the fog, doors hanging open, smoke still curling faintly from the engine. Daniel felt a chill. "Looks recent," he muttered. "Could be supplies, or something worse." Ruth scanned the area through her binoculars. No guards, no movement. "Let's check it out." They descended carefully, keeping low through the reeds. The closer they got, the more Daniel's unease grew. The ground was littered with papers, bullet casings, and dark stains soaked into the soil. The train engine hissed softly, still alive, like a wounded animal. Ruth climbed onto one of the wagons and peered inside. A moment later, she stiffened. "Daniel, you need to see this." He joined her, and his stomach twisted. Inside were rows of bunks, chains, and the faint, unmistakable smell of death. Scrawled across the wall in trembling letters were the words, "We were promised home." Thomas looked up at Daniel, eyes wide. "Did they live here?" Daniel swallowed hard. "No, kid. They died waiting to." Ruth jumped down, her jaw tight. "There's more up front. The logs might tell us where they were heading." They followed the tracks toward the engine, unaware that in the distance, beyond the next bend, a faint mechanical hum was growing louder. Another train was coming. The low hum became a thunder, rolling through the valley like a heartbeat. Daniel spun toward the sound. A second train was approaching from the east, its headlight cutting through the mist. The rails beneath their feet trembled. Ruth cursed under her breath. They're running supply lines again. We need cover. They darted behind the derailed wagons just as the new convoy screamed into view, brakes screeching, sparks flying. The train slowed but didn't stop, soldiers visible through the windows, helmets, rifles, the flash of insignia Daniel hadn't seen since the war. His pulse quickened. The cars near the front were sealed, armored. But one door swung open as the train passed, and for a split second, Daniel saw inside. Not soldiers, but prisoners. Thin faces, eyes wide with fear. Among them, he thought he saw a woman with auburn hair, holding a small child close. His chest clenched. Anna? The image vanished as quickly as it appeared. The train roared on, disappearing around the bend, its echo fading into the hills. Daniel stood frozen, heart hammering. Ruth touched his shoulder. You saw something. He nodded. A woman and a child. In the third car. Ruth's expression hardened. Then we follow it. If they're being transported east, the next stop's Belmore Station. Thomas looked up at Daniel, hope flickering in his eyes. It could be them. Daniel stared down the empty rails, smoke drifting across the sky like ghosts. I can't be sure, he said quietly, but I have to find out. Ruth began checking her weapon. Then we move now. The train's got a 4-hour lead. We stay off the tracks until we're close. As they started north, Daniel cast one last glance at the abandoned convoy behind them. The wind blew through the open doors, making them creak like whispers. We were promised home. He clenched his fists. Then I'll make sure someone gets there. They followed the tracks north through the afternoon haze, keeping to the tree line. The world had gone silent again, save for the crunch of gravel underfoot and the occasional groan of steel as the rails cooled in the wind. The air smelled faintly of ash and rain, the scent of a land that had burned too long. Ruth moved ahead, scouting the bends with her rifle at the ready. Thomas clung to Daniel's side. Exhaustion painted across his small face, but he didn't complain. He had learned that silence was the same as survival. The train's heading toward Belmore, Ruth said when they paused by a ruined signal tower. If we keep this pace, we'll reach the junction by nightfall. Daniel nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. He kept seeing flashes, Anna's hair catching sunlight, Peter's laughter, the woman and child on that train. His heart refused logic. Hope had taken root like something stubborn and wild. As dusk fell, the forest thickened around them. The track curved sharply into a gorge where the remains of an old bridge stretched across a ravine. Half of it had collapsed, leaving only rusted beams and broken planks swaying in the wind. Ruth frowned. If the train crossed here, we'll have to find another way down. No time, Daniel said. We climb. Ruth's look was sharp, but she didn't argue. They tied ropes scavenged from the truck and descended carefully, feet sliding on wet stone. Thomas trembled, but Daniel guided him, whispering steady words with every step. Halfway down, Ruth froze. From below came faint movement. Voices, the metallic click of weapons. Shadows flickered between the rocks. Patrol, she hissed. Daniel's pulse spiked. He pulled Thomas close, signaling silence. Then came the unmistakable crack of a rifle shot. The bullet tore through the air, striking the beam inches from Daniel's head. They'd been spotted. The gunfire shattered the silence of the gorge. Bullets sparked against the metal beams, echoing like thunder through the narrow pass. Daniel shoved Thomas behind a boulder and dropped flat, his heart pounding so hard it felt like another shot. Ruth returned fire instantly, 2 sharp bursts from her rifle. The echoes bounced between the cliffs. One of her bullets found its mark, and a soldier's scream followed. 3 of them, maybe 4, she hissed. Coming from below, Daniel scanned the rocks, spotting flashes of movement, helmets glinting, shadows shifting. He grabbed Elias's old revolver from his belt, steadying his aim despite the tremor in his arm. He fired once. A figure collapsed, rolling down the slope. Another took his place. Thomas pressed his hands over his ears, eyes wide with terror. I'm scared. I know, kid, Daniel said through clenched teeth. But we hold here, just a little longer. A grenade clinked against the rocks nearby. Ruth's eyes widened. Down. They dove as it exploded, a burst of dust and flame tearing through the ravine. Daniel felt the heat brush his neck. His ears rang, but he forced himself up, vision swimming. The patrol was closing in. Ruth ducked behind a rusted beam, firing again. They're trying to flush us out. Daniel's gaze darted upward. The broken bridge loomed overhead. He spotted a dangling support cable, thick and corroded. If we drop that beam, it'll block the path. He climbed the rocks under heavy fire, gripping the cable with one hand while aiming with the other. One shot, then another. The metal groaned and snapped. The beam collapsed with a thunderous crash, slamming down across the ravine. Rocks tumbled, smoke rose, and the enemy fire stopped. For a few seconds, only silence remained. Ruth looked at him, breathing hard. You just bought us time. Daniel nodded, chest heaving. Then let's use it. Smoke rolled across the ravine, thick and acrid. The fallen beam had bought them precious minutes, but Daniel knew it wouldn't last. Move, he barked, pulling Thomas up by the arm. Ruth slung her rifle across her back and followed, limping slightly from the blast. They scrambled up the far slope, clawing at roots and rocks as gunfire sputtered weakly behind them. When they reached the tree-line, the forest swallowed them whole. Pine needles carpeted the ground, muffling their steps, though the air was heavy with the scent of sap and smoke. Somewhere below, the enemy regrouped, their shouts echoing faintly through the gorge. Ruth stopped to catch her breath, pressing a hand to her leg. Blood seeped through her trouser fabric. Just a scratch, she muttered, though Daniel saw the pain flicker in her face. He tore a strip from his sleeve and tied it around the wound. Keep pressure on it. We've got to stay ahead of them. Thomas clung to his side, trembling. Are they going to find us? Daniel met his eyes. Not if we keep moving. They pressed deeper into the woods. The sun had sunk low, staining the sky with bruised purple light. Owls began to stir, their cries echoing through the branches like ghosts. The deeper they went, the quieter it became, too quiet. Ruth halted suddenly, raising her hand. Do you hear that? At first, Daniel heard nothing. Then came a faint metallic click, the unmistakable sound of a safety being switched off. Down, he shouted. Gunfire erupted from the trees ahead. Muzzle flashes flared like lightning. Daniel dragged Thomas behind a fallen trunk as splinters flew. Ruth fired back, rolling into cover. One enemy fell, another shouted orders in a foreign tongue. Flank left, Ruth yelled. Daniel nodded, circling wide through the trees. He crept up behind the nearest shooter, pressing the revolver to his back. Drop it. The man froze, young, terrified, barely older than a boy. His rifle slipped from his hands. Daniel hesitated. He couldn't pull the trigger. The soldier's eyes darted up to meet Daniel's. Wide, frightened, human. Mud streaked his cheek. His hands trembled in the cold. Please, he whispered in accented English. Don't. Daniel's finger tightened on the trigger, then loosened. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold still. Behind him, the gunfire slowed, fading into scattered shots and shouts. The battle was ending, but his war, the one inside, raged harder than ever. Go, Daniel said finally. Drop your weapon and go. The boy stared, confused. Then, realizing mercy was real, he turned and stumbled into the trees, vanishing like a ghost. Daniel exhaled shakily, lowering the revolver. Daniel. Ruth's voice cut through the smoke. She limped toward him, dragging her rifle. Why didn't you finish it? He wasn't a threat, Daniel said quietly. Not now, she snapped. But he'll bring more. Her words hung in the air like frost. Thomas emerged from behind the fallen log, eyes wide and questioning. You let him live? Daniel nodded. Because someone has to. They didn't speak again for a long while. The forest burned faintly to the south, the glow of the destroyed bridge flickering through the trees. They followed the slope north until they found a small stream. Ruth collapsed by the water, rinsing the blood from her leg. Thomas drank greedily, while Daniel stood watch, revolver loose in his hand. When the silence grew too deep, Ruth said softly, You remind me of someone I knew, someone who used to believe there was still good left in people. Daniel glanced at her. Used to. She met his eyes, a faint, tired smile curling her lips. He didn't survive long enough to prove it. The wind picked up, scattering embers through the trees. Somewhere far off, a wolf howled. Daniel looked toward the dark horizon where the rails disappeared into the night. Then maybe it's my turn to prove him right. By the next evening, they reached the outskirts of Belmore, a forgotten rail town swallowed by fog and silence. What had once been a busy transport hub was now a graveyard of steel and soot. Tracks bent and twisted like the bones of some long-dead giant. The station building stood crooked, its windows shattered, roof half collapsed. Yet, faint light flickered within, the dull orange of a campfire. Ruth raised her rifle. Someone's inside. Daniel nodded, motioning for quiet. They crept along the edge of the platform, boots crunching on broken glass. Through a crack in the wall, Daniel saw figures, 3 of them, huddled around a fire. Civilians, maybe refugees. One looked up suddenly, sensing movement. "Don't shoot," a man's voice called, hoarse but steady. "We're not soldiers." Daniel stepped into the open, hands raised. Ruth followed, still cautious. The man who'd spoken was thin, bearded, wearing a coat several sizes too large. His eyes widened as he saw them. "You came from the south?" Daniel nodded. "From Site 12. The man's face went pale. "Then you've seen it." "We burned it," Ruth said simply. For a moment, the man said nothing. Then he motioned them closer. "There's something you should know. Trains still run from here, once every 2 days. They take survivors east, not to camps, but to a place they call Haven. We thought it was a lie, until one came back last month." Daniel's heart quickened. "Someone returned?" The man nodded. "A woman and a boy. Said they escaped during a transfer. They were looking for someone, a soldier named Mercer." The name hit Daniel like a thunderclap. His throat tightened. "Where are they now?" The man pointed north. "They left yesterday, followed the main track toward the coast." Ruth exhaled. "Then that's our path." Daniel felt his pulse steady, hope burning again where despair had lived too long. "Then we move before dawn." They left Belmore Station before the first light touched the sky. The air was sharp, heavy with salt and mist, the scent of the distant sea. The tracks curved north, cutting through fields gone wild with weeds and scattered wreckage. Somewhere beyond the horizon lay the coast, and maybe, just maybe, the end of their long chase. Daniel walked at the front, his boots striking the cold rails. Each step echoed like a heartbeat. Ruth followed a few paces behind, her limp worse, but her eyes still sharp. Thomas trotted between them, small and quiet, carrying the memory of every loss on his narrow shoulders. "Do you really think it's them?" Ruth asked softly. Daniel didn't answer at first. The wind tore at his coat, tugging at the frayed sleeves. "If it isn't," he said finally, "then I'll keep walking until it is." They pressed on. As the sun broke through the clouds, they came upon a small signal house, half collapsed beside the tracks. Smoke curled weakly from its chimney. Daniel raised a hand, signaling caution. He crept closer, revolver drawn. Inside, an old man sat by a dying fire, humming to himself. His uniform, long faded, marked him as a station warden, one of the last. When he noticed them, he smiled faintly, revealing the yellow of tea-stained teeth. "Travelers," he rasped. "Not many of you left." Daniel stepped forward. "We're following a woman and a boy. They passed here yesterday." The warden nodded slowly. "I saw them." She was limping, carrying the boy on her back part of the way. Gave him the last of her water. He pointed toward the north. "They took the coast road. If you hurry, you'll catch them by nightfall." Daniel's heart surged. He thanked the man and turned to go, but the warden's voice stopped him. "Careful, soldier. The coast isn't what it used to be. The war didn't end there. It just changed its name." The warning lingered as they vanished into the rising wind. Ahead, the ocean roared unseen, calling them home. By dusk, the land gave way to cliffs. The last stretch of rail ended abruptly where the earth had crumbled into the roaring surf below. The sea stretched endless and black, its waves slamming against jagged rocks like cannon fire. The wind howled through broken telegraph poles, carrying the faint tang of salt and something colder, memory. Ruth stopped beside Daniel, scanning the coastline through her field glass. "Tracks," she murmured. "2 sets. A woman's boots, smaller footprints beside hers. They go toward that shack." At the base of the cliffs, a weather-beaten cabin leaned against the rocks, its roof half gone, smoke rising weakly from a crooked chimney. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. He descended the slope carefully, the smell of the sea filling his lungs. Every step felt heavier, as if the earth itself resisted what he was about to find. When he reached the door, he hesitated. His hand hovered over the latch. Ruth stood a few steps behind him, silent. He pushed it open. Inside, the cabin was dim but warm. A kettle hissed faintly on the fire. 2 blankets lay neatly folded on the cot. And on the table, Daniel's breath caught, sat a photograph. The corners were burned, but the faces were unmistakable. Anna and Peter, smiling in sunlight that now felt like another life. Thomas stepped beside him, whispering, "Is that them?" Daniel nodded slowly. They were here. Ruth pointed toward a folded note pinned under the photo. The paper trembled in Daniel's hands as he read it aloud. "If you find this, we're heading east along the shore. There's a boat waiting, an old fishing vessel. We'll wait as long as we can." Daniel's voice broke. "They're alive." Outside, thunder rolled over the sea. Ruth placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we run." They left the cabin and sprinted toward the darkening horizon, waves crashing below, the promise of reunion just beyond the storm. The first drops fell like ice. Within minutes, the sky tore open, unleashing a torrent that drenched the cliffs in sheets of rain. Daniel pushed forward through the storm, the wind howling so fiercely it nearly tore the breath from his lungs. Ruth stumbled beside him, shielding Thomas beneath her coat. The sea below churned like a living thing, waves slamming against the rocks with a sound like artillery fire. "They won't launch in this," Ruth shouted over the wind. "They have to," Daniel yelled back, his voice raw. "If the patrols reach the shore before we do, they're dead." Lightning flashed, illuminating the coastline. Jagged rocks, scattered debris, and the faint silhouette of a boat rocking violently near the cove. Daniel's heart leapt. There! They scrambled down the muddy path, slipping and sliding. The closer they got, the clearer he could see it. An old fishing vessel, its single lantern swinging wildly. Figures moved aboard. 2 shapes huddled against the storm. "Anna," he shouted. The wind stole the name, hurling it out to sea. But one of the figures turned sharply, hand rising to her mouth. She shouted something, impossible to hear, and began waving frantically. Ruth reached the bottom first, firing 2 quick shots into the air, a signal. The boat's engine sputtered, then caught, coughing dark smoke. Daniel and Thomas sprinted through the shallows, the icy water biting their legs. A massive wave struck the shore, knocking Daniel off his feet. He surfaced, choking on salt. The boat drifted just out of reach. Anna leaned over the side, shouting his name again. This time he heard it, clear as a bell through the storm. "Daniel!" He fought forward, every muscle screaming, the world spinning with water and wind. His fingers brushed the boat's hull, so close, so painfully close, when another wave slammed into him, dragging him under. Through the churning dark, he heard Thomas cry out, "Daniel!" The sea swallowed him whole. The roar of the storm vanished, replaced by a cold, crushing silence. Salt burned his eyes as the current dragged him down, spinning him through black water and shattered light. His lungs screamed for air. Above, lightning flashed in fractured ribbons, painting ghostly shapes that slipped away before he could grasp them. He kicked hard, but his clothes weighed him down. Something snagged his boot, a coil of fishing net, drifting like a serpent in the dark. Panic clawed at him. He twisted, pulling, the net tightening around his leg. Every second stretched into eternity. Then, through the murk, he saw it, a pale shape descending toward him. A hand. Anna's face appeared for a heartbeat, distorted by the water, eyes wide with fear and love. He reached for her, their fingers brushing before a surge tore them apart. The world flickered. Voices echoed, muffled and strange. Daniel breathed. But whose voice was it? Anna's? Ruth's? His own? He tore free of the net and kicked upward, breaking through the surface with a gasp that felt like being born again. Rain hammered his face. The boat loomed ahead, rising and falling with the waves. "Grab him!" Ruth shouted. 2 arms reached down Anna's. He caught her wrist, skin slick with salt, and she pulled with all her strength. For a terrible moment, the storm seemed to hold him there, suspended between sea and sky. Then, with a final heave, he tumbled onto the deck, coughing water, chest burning. Anna fell beside him, shaking, her hair plastered to her face. Their eyes met, disbelief, relief, everything at once. "Anna," he whispered. She pressed her forehead against his. "You came home." Ruth steered the boat away from shore as thunder rolled overhead. Thomas clung to Daniel's arm, sobbing in silence. Behind them, soldiers' searchlights cut across the cliffs, too late. The sea had claimed its price, but it had spared its own. The storm broke with the dawn. When Daniel opened his eyes, The world was pale and quiet, waves whispering against the hull, gulls calling somewhere in the gray distance. The sky blushed faintly with light, and for the first time in years, he felt warmth that didn't come from fire. Anna sat beside him on the deck, wrapped in a tattered blanket. Her hand rested on his chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath. "You should rest," she said softly. "I've rested enough," Daniel murmured, forcing a smile. He turned his head toward the sound of Thomas's laughter, small, uncertain, but real. Ruth was showing him how to tie a sailor's knot, her hands trembling from exhaustion, yet patient as ever. They'd made it. Somehow. "Where are we?" Daniel asked. Anna pointed east. "The man who helped us said the next port is called Haven. He said it's safe." Daniel stared at the horizon, endless water stretching into gold. "Safe?" he repeated, as if testing the word. It felt fragile, almost foreign on his tongue. Anna squeezed his hand. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." He looked at her then. Really looked, at the lines carved by grief and endurance, at the eyes that still carried the same light from their wedding day. "I thought I lost you." "You did," she said quietly. "And I thought I'd never find you again. But here we are." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of salt and pine. Daniel stood slowly, leaning on the railing. Behind them, the coastline was barely visible now, a broken world receding into mist. Ahead lay something new, something unmarked by war. Ruth joined him, silent, watching the sun climb higher. "So," she said, almost smiling. "What now, Captain?" Daniel exhaled, the last weight lifting from his chest. "Now," he said, "we start living again." The boat glided east, light breaking fully across the waves. And for the first time since the war began, the soldier truly went home.